We're wrapping up our series for Women's History Month, talking about changing the image women have of themselves with my guest, Heike Martin, on this episode of the Speaking Your Brand podcast. More and more women are making an impact by starting businesses, running for office, and speaking up for what matters. With my background as a TV political analyst, entrepreneur, and speaker, I interview and coach purpose-driven women to shape their brands, grow their companies, and become recognized as influencers in their field. This is Speaking Your Brand, your place to learn how to persuasively communicate your message to your audience. Hi there, and welcome to the Speaking Your Brand podcast. I'm your host, Carol Cox. We are wrapping up the series we've been doing in the month of March for Women's History Month. I wanted to talk about the image women have of themselves, how we think about how we look and how we can change that. So when I started thinking about this episode, I immediately knew that I had to have on as my guest, Heike Martin. Heike is a photographer, and she went through our Thought Leader Academy in 2022, so I got to know her better. In this episode, we talk about growing up, how it is that we as women are told either implicitly or explicitly about how we should look, and then how that shapes how we show up in the world and how we show up for ourselves. And Heike, as a photographer, has seen this firsthand, whether she's doing branding headshots for a woman entrepreneur or the book that she did for women athletes. Links to Heike's website and her LinkedIn are in the show notes, so definitely make sure to connect with her there. Towards the end of the conversation, we talk about timing and the importance of timing and how that can show up in your life and how that has showed up in Heike's life. If you would like to join us in the Thought Leader Academy, you can get all of the details by going to speakingyourbrand.com/academy. Again, that's speakingyourbrand.com/academy. Now, let's get on with the show. Welcome to the Speaking Your Brand podcast, Heike.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited, Carol.
I am too. When I was thinking about putting together this series in March for Women's History Month, and I started thinking about the image that we have of ourselves as women and how much that is shaped by our external environment, the culture, the media that we grow up in. And then I instantly knew that you were the person that I wanted to have on the podcast to have this conversation with, because you are a photographer and you photograph a lot of women in the work that you do. And you also have a book that you published last year around female athletes called Owning Our Game. And I know your mission is about helping women own their visibility as well. So I really want to talk about, what is it as women, the image we have of ourselves, kind of these labels that we put on ourselves, or how we think we're supposed to show up, or how we think we're supposed to act or look, versus what is it? Like, how do we find our authentic selves? How do we feel comfortable being ourselves and showing up for ourselves as much as for other people? So Heike, let's go ahead and let's just dive right in. When you work with the women who you photograph, what did you start finding, over the years? What stood out to you? And why did you decide that this was going to become your mission?
Great question. Because I work mainly with business women. I think I need to maybe do a caveat with that, understand like who I'm actually my client is. And you think business women, a lot of them own their own business. A lot of them are incredibly experts in their field. They have high positions, CEOs, you name it, like within their own different organizations. And yet when they come to me, I get, I don't like the way I look. I'm not photogenic. Like, I've been pushing off getting headshots done because I just hate the aging process. So it's like, right away it's like, okay, fear. Like all these different fears are popping up. And so then it's like, okay, time to ask questions. Let's dive a little bit deeper here. What is really going on? And so I've been over the years figuring out there's like usually 3 different parts for me that shows up with women. There are fears, obviously, of like, I am a certain persona when I'm in my expertise. And all of a sudden, this is a very vulnerable part, like showing up. Because you have to admit, I have aged. I'm not 20 anymore. I might be 40, 50, 60. Forgetting that in that process, you have actually gained even more expertise. You have become a person that people look up to, admire, and ask for help. And yet when it comes to showing up, you're pulling back. So we have to sort of work with that fear. ageism, obviously very much in there. For others, women, that's a huge one. Like dyeing our hair, not having wrinkles, needing to wear certain kinds of clothing that make us appear younger. So that all of those pieces all of a sudden like come to the forefront, and those are big fears.
Well, I just wanted to echo and to validate this that the ageism, and the fears of how we look, in our culture, as we all know, youth is very much venerated, and women as they get older, not only are kind of expected and told to do whatever they can to continue to look younger, but really older women become invisible. People don't pay attention to them. People don't want to listen to older women. And so like young women have their own set of challenges, but then older women have another set as well. And you're right that, being photographed feels very vulnerable in that sense.
Yeah. So like pulling out and allowing those fears to surface, I think is usually step one. To me, it's like instead of like hiding behind those shadows of fear, allows for an openness to then step into that. You know what? I'm here to guide you. Like let's talk about what it is about, what you're actually really fearing. Sometimes it's also bad experiences that comes someone dissecting your photo. I mean, if you've grown up like with like your aunts and grandma, like, oh my, look at her calves and look at her smile, and I mean, it's like, so I get all these stories when I work with women. And so it's sometimes dissecting, going a little bit into the background, figuring out what is it that is actually holding you back. And then let's figure out how we can turn this around, turn this into a positive experience, and looking into like, who are we actually needing to address it? Like, what do people want to see in you? It's all about what's on the inside. Like, how do we pull out the amazing personality that you have? How do we pull out the inner actions that you actually want to have, like in your eyes, how they shine, and sort of bring that in. But then the other piece that I find interesting is almost the voice. Like people have been told you're mom first, or you're wife first, or you're like all these other labels that you bring. So yes, you're coming in for maybe a headshot for your business, but you're still like being bombarded by all these other labels that you're meant to be. And you're very conflicted about as who you're actually showing up.
Oh, that's interesting, right? Because they have multiple identities, or we have multiple identities. And when you go to be photographed, there probably is a little bit of tension going on there for the woman.
Yeah. So the one thing I'm learning to do with it, at the beginning, I think I was like, oh, I need to help them check these other labels. And now I'm to the point where, again, like over the years, as I've worked with women, it's like, no, instead of like getting rid of labels, it's like, find the label that who you want to be. Like, it's your voice. You need to figure out like what your voice really is. But these other labels have shaped you into the amazing person that you are. So let's not get rid of them, hold them, because all of them have added layers to your personality, how you interact, like the mindset shifts you've had to overcome, the capabilities. Like if you're a mom and you're full-time running a business, and yet you're also amazing at raising your kids, I mean, that is a plus that you bring to the table that no one else has. So it's learning to live with your labels, but also not just being the mom label or the dog lover label or the coffee drinking label, but actually more like, okay, I'm a CEO here. All these other things have shaped me into the person I am today. So that we want to bring all of that into the image.
Yeah, just bring like the coffee mug and the dog with you to the photo shoot and use them as your props, right?
Exactly, but not just, but it can be a good part of it.
So Heike, let's talk a little bit about that. What, the women, when you photograph them, they may be a little bit reluctant at first, maybe a feeling, like you said, feeling vulnerable, feeling a little uncertain. How do they feel when they see the end result, the photos that you've taken of them?
It is a whole turnaround. But I think that the process actually happens during the photo shoot. It happens during the conversations we have ahead of time because they feel heard. So it's like being transparent and open, and for me to like ask questions, pull things out, allows for that transformation to happen even before the photo shoot. And then doing a photo shoot is actually, again, like where this affirmation just happens. Like I get excited when I get to work with women because there's just like, I see it happen right in front of my eyes, that all of a sudden, like the hesitation for the first 5 images that I take, we know they're going to end up in the trash, but then it starts happening. And I see it happen, and then being able to watch, and I get the tears afterwards, or just the, oh my God, I am who I am. And this is amazing. And I'm proud to use those images and start focusing again on who I am in all of this. So it's a beautiful thing to watch.
Well, I would love for you to share some tips with our listeners for their own photo sessions. But before we get to that, I just want to say that, so Heike, you went through our Thought Leader Academy last year, and I know that you are friends with two other women who all three of you live in the same city, the same area. And so all three of you have been through the Thought Leader Academy, and I've seen the photos that you've taken of them, plus the other photos you've taken of other women on your LinkedIn. And I can see it in the eyes, because when someone smiles and it's they're not really smiling because the eyes don't show it. And like, you pose for a photo and you kind of smile, but I can see the photos you've taken of them. I can see it in their eyes, how much they believe in themselves in that moment.
Yeah. And I think that's really all it is. I mean, obviously they already have it in them. It is just giving them permission to show it. And I think that's sort of where I thrive with them, is it's like pulling that out and giving them permission to be visible in that moment.
Okay, Heike, so now all of us can come to Pennsylvania to have you be our photographer. Although, of course, you all welcome to fly to Heike and she can take your photos. But for those of us who are going to be in our local towns and we were looking for a photographer to do this for us, what are some things we should look for, I guess, in a photographer? And then we'll talk about some tips for the actual session.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to finding a photographer, it's incredibly important to always look at someone's portfolio. And then also the process. Do they actually take time to listen to you? Do they ask questions? Do they allow you to ask questions? Because if there's no communication and you're just showing up for the session and it's like, boom, here you are, I give you 15 minutes and you need to be happy, it's really difficult. I mean, we, as a good photographer, can still sometimes get the emotions going during that time. But I think especially if you're coming with like deep fears or things that need to be cleared up ahead of time, conversation is so important. But also looking at the style of a photographer. I mean, that's again, like I would really browse through someone's website and make sure that they're consistent in what they offer, that the quality, first of all, is there. But to me, it's like, do they get on a phone call with me? That is number one.
Okay. Now, this may seem very simple and basic to you, Heike, but what do you mean by style when you look at a photographer's portfolio? Like, is it like as simple as I look at their photos and yes, these look good to me, and so they must be good? Or are there specific things to look out for?
Style is a little bit like, is the lighting similar across all of the images? Are the eyes in focus? Or do I have some blurry, some like yellowish tints over them? I mean, you want to make sure that the images across the board look similar. That just shows that they have consistency in providing the same quality to you. So that would be one. And then otherwise, I still would like to see some variations, because again, we're all unique. So I don't want to have a cookie cutter headshot either. So can I see again that personality coming out, maybe slightly different backdrops or how they have posed you? Again, looking at, do I also see women of different shapes, of different skin colors? If I only see like model-esque, certain kinds of people that, again, our society tells how we need to look, all with the perfect skin, and no one else on their side, then it's like, can they do someone in their 50s? Can they do someone who might have 30 pounds more than they would like to have, or 200 pounds more than we consider acceptable? I want to be able to have people come in of every size and shape.
Basically, also, as you're looking at photographers' portfolios, do you see yourself represented in some of the people they've taken photos of?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's really helpful. Now, so imagine that we found a photographer, we like their portfolio, they look, high quality, consistent, all that. So we're getting ready for our session and then we show up. What are some things that we can do as the person being photographed?
So first of all, I hope that your photographer did his job and helped you think through clothing. So that again, like the whole styling, that you're wearing colors and clothing that fits you well, that bring out the colors in your eyes. Like you're wearing your blue dress right now. I mean, it's perfect color for you. I'm wearing a certain kind of pink that again is like completely and works with my skin tones. So again, like giving guidance, a photographer needs to guide you the entire way. So that is key one. If you have all of that at your fingertips, figuring out makeup, that it's camera ready makeup, and not throws highlights because you have like SPF in there or things that all of a sudden gives you a greenish tint. Or so it's this little details that a photographer again needs to guide you from A to Z, and you need to have all that at your fingertips before the session. But then coming in to the session is where the magic then happens. When you've done all the prep work, then the magic can actually happen because you're already relaxed. You know you've brought the right kind of clothing along. You have different outfits. You can try different scenarios with that to give you options. But then the connection needs to happen, and that is where your photographer just needs to pull you in and allow you to grow and shine and just relax in the process and allow that transformation to happen. And it should be fun. There should be lots of laughter happening.
Yes. And also I'm thinking back to a photo session that I did a few years ago, and the photographer, she's fantastic. And, I recommend, she's in Orlando. So I recommend, so many women who live here in Orlando to go to her. And it was not rushed. Like, I think it was her only client the entire day. She, it did not feel rushed. Like, okay, we got to get all these done. Let's boom, boom, boom. Let's get them. And, we had that like relaxing environment, and it felt like she was truly there for me to make sure that we got what we needed.
Yeah, it's that, because the last thing you want to have is someone standing at the door and looking at the clock.
Right. Yeah.
And pushing out the door. No, it's again like that time that you need where someone can relax and be in the moment, and then you can pull things out of them that they did not expect out of themselves.
Yes. So she had helped me with some clothing options beforehand, and then also with some props. So like I brought a microphone, because obviously being a speaker and a podcaster, we have like my signature talk canvas board, all the Post-it notes as something for the background. So that's another thing I think that a lot of times we don't think about when we go to a photo session, especially for like personal brand and business photos that we need. Are there props that would be helpful that represent what we do?
And that's again, like all part of the whole intake that you do ahead of time is like thinking through, like, I've worked in marketing before I started my own photography business. So bringing that expertise into knowing how to build websites and what goes into marketing is to help, again, my women think through, like, do you have a workshop coming up? Are you rebranding your website? Like knowing what you call to action graphics need to be and how do we place you, and what tools do you need to bring along so that can happen. So yeah, it's all in the prep work.
Yeah, it truly is to make it a successful session. Heike, let's talk about the book that you published last year, which is called Owning Our Game: Female Athlete Stories of Strength, Beauty, and Athleticism. First, why did you decide to put together this photo book? And then what came out of it? What did you learn?
Well, the book was not my first intention, first and foremost. I wanted to do something creative for myself. And then started in 2020 in January, had my first client or friend willing to do some photography. She's a boxer. She's actually the one on the cover. And I said, like, I just want to come out. I want to try some new photography and do this with you. And also was curious about some action photos. And then as we're doing this, she starts telling me her story. And that's sort of what all of a sudden it's like, ooh, I need to hear more. Like your images, what you're doing now, and your story, how you ended up getting to be a boxer and having now her own studio was incredibly and amazing. And so I had a tape her story, we wrote it down. And so that was my first, like, ooh, this is more than I had envisioned here. This is not just my own little side project. This needs to be more. But then unfortunately the pandemic happened. So I got to do like 6 clients that year, in spite of all the lockdowns and everything. And every story was just like another eye-opening story of not just an athlete, but a woman who loves the sport. And that sport has transformed how she views her life and how she interacts with her community. And that is what I found incredibly eye-opening, that it wasn't just like, oh, I'm the Olympic athlete or I have these goals for sport. It was all about, how do I show up in the rest of my life? And how did I get here? And the sport is something that helped them. So then after the whole lockdown, it's like, I heard more and more saying like, well, I want to see these stories. And so out of that came the idea of, why don't we put this into a book? Then the women have their story and we can actually share this with more people. And so I ended up photographing a total of 14 different athletes. They're all more or less local from the area here. And they're very much community oriented business women, all of them. So out of that came actually the talk and why I ended up signing up with you. Because I realized I need to do more with this. People are so incredibly trying to figure like, what is my vision? How do I show up? And so the talk, like owning my visibility, is what came out of that.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's really cool. I know, Heike, you did the book launch while you were in the Thought Leader Academy last summer.
Yep.
Yes.
And it was all like, I realized I was launching the book and it's like, I need to have something in place because I know I will get asked to talk and I will be probably sharing in other groups. And that is exactly what happened out of that. So I needed to get that talk ready.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to ask you some more specifics about the signature talk that you worked on when you were in the Thought Leader Academy. Before we get there though, Heike, let me ask you, have you always felt comfortable being visible yourself?
Not really. My husband always laughs. He said, like, it's so weird. Like all of a sudden, like you have no problem being in front of people. Like used to be in the past, I would always push him to the front to talk and do whatever announcements or be the front of our family. But I've found something that I love and that I know that I'm good at and that is helping other people. And that I think that just has opened up something in me that now I can't stop sharing.
What got you into photography in the first place? Since you said you have been doing marketing, did you always love photography when you were growing up?
I did. My dad is kind of the one who was a photographer in our family. And from little on, I loved when I was able to get a hand on his camera and do some family photography. But I did not get serious until I actually worked for a small fair trade company and ended up doing marketing for them for 14 years. And out of that was like, oh, I hated the marketing images we had to work with. And so my boss was just, here's a camera, go take pictures. And I realized I wanted quality images, so I had to learn. So it was like, it really pushed me to grow with that.
Oh, that's such a neat story. You just never know where your next like career trajectory is going to come from, right?
I know. So I feel like they sort of planted a seed in me. They were the ones who trusted me with the marketing too and allowed me to take classes to get my certificates in digital and print design and all of that. And so out of that, it's like, I love designing websites. So I still do this on the side for some of my clients. And but out of that, realizing imagery is such an important part. And I love the interaction that I'm getting when I get to work with people. It's just like being able to pull something out of a person and helping them grow and transform in front of my eyes. It's just, it lights me up.
Yes. Okay. So then, Heike, let's talk about your signature talk, what you worked on when you were in the Thought Leader Academy last year. And I know that you worked with our lead speaking coach, Diane Diaz, on your talk. So can you tell us what your talk is about, like, and kind of your goal of the talk? And then we'll talk about where you've been presenting it.
Yeah, so the talk is called Owning Our Visibility or Owning Your Visibility, Leveraging Your Fear, Your Voice, and Your Timing. And that is actually where the interesting piece comes in, because I've learned over the number of years of working with women, we're all stuck at a certain place. For some, it's that initial fear. And I talk about my birth canal story, which is sort of my way of getting everybody hooked into the experience.
Okay, no. I want to hear more now. You can't just say that and just leave us hanging.
So my birth canal story actually is this. I've been through the birth canal twice. The second time actually happened like my first year into business. We went spelunking, like cave diving, and ended up in a small cave where we only had two exits. One was like through the roof, like climbing up the walls. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. Like no skills, not athletic enough to do this. And the second one was called the birth canal, which was like, just on the ground, working your way through a tunnel. I was like, okay, that's not a problem, until we were in that tunnel. I mean, it was the tightest. I mean, I had like a little backpack on, which did not fit through the tunnel. It was like on your belly, like inching your way forward, like bit by bit by bit. We couldn't even see the exit. It was pitch black. And you had to get your way out of there. So all kinds of thoughts went through my head during that time. And that's sort of where where I exploded my own fears and kind of came out of my own fears and realizing I was stuck. And that whole experience was just like a rebirth, and boom, just triggered stuff in me.
Okay, hold on. That's amazing, Heike. Because as you're describing that, like I'm feeling the claustrophobia for you, and I'm not, and I would be so scared in that situation, but that it they say that growth comes from the discomfort, right? Or from like the fear. And that sounds like that's what happened to you.
It totally did. And it's like, I still look at this. I have one picture when I was luckily enough one of the first ones in our group to get out. So I took some photos of others coming through finally to the exit. And it feels like it's like all you can see is a face coming out and that's it. I mean, it's that tight even at the end. And so that experience, was definitely an eye opener, a release, like really a release, what birth does. It's like a rebirth. So pretty incredible. But that made me realize how many others have similar fears or just, their own kinds of fears, and how do we leverage that? So then the other piece, so fear is the first thing I tackle with, again, in that talk. But then the other one is voice, like finding your own voice. And again, through the athlete book that I did, one of my athletes, she's a marathon runner, and she talked about running, like everything. She said, like, I'm a business owner, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm all of those things. But she said, but my first thing is I'm a runner. That is everything. So her voice is finally being able to label herself and saying that out loud, above everything else, I'm a runner. And that is what I want people to find in themselves, that they can shed some of those labels, like I'm a wife, I'm a mom, I'm a dog lover, I'm a, like, again, not getting rid of them, but finding out exactly what your voice is.
Okay.
And so when I do,
so I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is just like, I had this kind of little like light bulb moment here, that it sounds like her claiming for herself this identity of a runner is something that is of her by herself, not an identity that's in relationship to someone else, as a wife, as a mother, as a dog owner, dog lover. And I feel like as women, like we, for the most part, we tend to be more relational, because that's our survival, strategy. That's, where we've come from as in our DNA. And so I feel like so many of our identities by default are about our relationship with someone else versus about ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And again, like, I feel like you need to hold all of the other labels that you call yourself. They're all part of you. And that's a strength that we bring as women. But there's still something in taking ownership of who you are, so you don't get lost in all of those labels. You have to find your way through that and claim the label that is true to you. And that is different for every person, because we go through these stages of life, like you're a mom at some point, but all of a sudden the kids leave the house. So empty nest, boom, it's like your identity is shifting. So, but if you have that voice, you know what your voice is, then that transition is much easier. And so, like, being able to find that voice and claim it, it's like, to me, it's always like naming things, like naming your fear. You want to name that voice, and it just opens up something in you that allows you to be true to yourself.
I like that. And then Heike, tell us about timing.
Timing is a whole other one. And that's where everybody's like, what do you mean timing? So I have one other story in there that I share. And and that's, again, like, everyone needs to find their own timing. But I've worked with, again, like, women, again, we're being so pushed into showing up sometimes too early when we're not ready. Or we say, like, oh, you need to wait until this is in place, or you need to wait until you have this credential, or you need to have so many followers before you can actually claim this and this and this. And so it's like, I want to, again, like, take ownership of, like, when I want to show up, how I want to show up, where I want to show up. And for, like, one of the stories I tell, and there's a client of mine who came out as a lesbian when she was in her early 50s. And it took her probably at least 5 years. And I did a branding shoot for her. And she said, like, I want to have a picture done of myself wrapped in the LGBTQ flag. So that's something, she said, like, I never thought I would ever do. And so we did. This was, like, again, like an eye-opening, transformative moment for her. And since then, she has used this image in so many places for her marketing. It has opened up doors for her, but it was her timing. Nobody pushed her at the beginning to do this. She needed to be ready before she could claim that piece of her. And again, share with the world. I think timing for me is like, when are you sharing something beyond yourself, beyond maybe your inner circle? So claiming and choosing your time when it's right for you is a big piece of being visible.
Heike, I love that story. That is so beautiful. And this idea of timing really resonates with me. And I think about, so much over the past 10 plus years of our lives, so much being lived online, especially on social media, where the expectation has been that we will give of ourselves to our online audiences, our social media followers, whether we have 100 followers or 10,000 or 100,000 or a million, whatever it happens to be. And yes, there's definitely a lot of benefit of that visibility, that exposure, building that personal brand, having people know who you are and what you do. Yet it's not costless. There is a cost to it in the sense that we are putting so much of ourselves out there as like a public performance, so to speak, for both the praise and potential criticism that comes with that. And I've been starting to think more and more about this, that it really should be up to us, timing, like up to us to decide when and how much of us we want to give to like strangers. I mean, for the most part, right? People who we don't really know well.
Yeah, totally. Exactly. And I think we need to, again, like take back a little bit of that. It's a responsibility on ourselves and again, taking ownership of where we want to show up and how we want to show up. So like to me, the fear, the voice, and the timing, they all need to come in sync again, so that you're again like true to who you want to be out there.
Yeah. Well, Heike, I'm so appreciative of the important work that you do with the women that you work with, plus the work that you're putting out into the world with your book and with your signature talk. What is next for you?
Well, next up actually is I will be speaking for a STEM Up program networking group in March. And they were, again, when they heard, the leader actually heard me speak the first time in last August. She said, like, our women need this. It's, again, like women in STEM, incredibly intelligent, amazing women, but they are so afraid of their own visibility in a men's world. And so I'll be doing a networking sort of breakout session with them, a little bit workshop to get someone to talk about some of those issues. Otherwise, I'm constantly on the move with photography and claiming that as I'm working. I'm also working on a workshop with several other women in our area on, again, some of those topics. We're all bringing our own different expertise to the table, and hopefully we'll have that in place by the end of October this year.
Oh, that sounds exciting. And Heike, can you share with our listeners what your experience was like in the Thought Leader Academy? What did you enjoy the most?
Oh my God, first of all, having very, very detailed sessions with all of you, with both of you leading, you and Diane. But then obviously the VIP session of putting the entire keynote together. I think having a person who walks you through the process, is able to hear what you have to say, turn it around and say, help you figure out like what these different pieces are, how to put them together. And within like a short time, walking out of there and saying, oh my God, you actually have this talk together. And it makes sense and it's comprehensive. And having like the feedback form that you guys suggested, like I used that in all of my presentations last year. And that is why I'm now ready to do the workshop, because I have heard where women were stuck. I heard like somewhere in the time zone, some in the fear, some in the void, like being able now to put this now into the workshop could not have happened without that feedback form. So that to me was tremendous, just getting all those pieces lined up.
Oh, that's great to hear. Yes. All right. Yeah. The feedback form is really powerful, especially for in-person events that you're speaking at. And for those of you listening, if you haven't yet heard me talk about the feedback form, I'll pop a link in the show notes to a prior episode where we talked about that. And so that you can learn more there. Heike, again, thank you so much for the work that you do and for coming on the podcast. I'll make sure to include links in the show notes to your LinkedIn profile and to your website so listeners can find you there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again for coming on the podcast.
You are so welcome. Thank you.
Having these conversations on the podcast with women like Heike and BBG from last week and BB Parayash from the week before just reminds me of how many incredible women there are out there making a difference and how fortunate and grateful I feel that I have crossed paths with them, either as podcast listeners or for those who have been in the Thought Leader Academy. If you would like to join us in the Thought Leader Academy to work on your thought leadership and your signature talk and to be around amazing women, you can get all of the details at speakingyourbrand.com/academy. Again, that's speakingyourbrand.com/academy. Next week, for the month of April, we are kicking off a series on marketing We're going to be talking about how much marketing is changing and how, as an entrepreneur, as a speaker, as a thought leader, as a content creator, what you can think about doing next. So you won't want to miss that. Be sure to click subscribe or follow in your podcast app. Until next time, thanks for listening.